Basically, there are about 20,000 kids a year that age out of foster care. And at least a quarter of them end up being homeless sometime in the next 4 years or so. And you can imagine what that's like at the tender point in your life, not having the security of a place to call home. So basically we enacted this program, which includes not only the subsidies so that they can get an affordable place to live, but also provides a lot of the wraparound services so that they can get education and other types of things that will allow them to become totally independent.
So that, I would say, is number one, is housing, stability, how you're going to fend for yourself. What is in your future for post-education? How are you going to eat? Where does the money come to support yourself and to do all of these things?
Just what is it like to suddenly have no place to live when you turn 21? Every year, roughly 5,000 such foster care youth end up homeless. But a new program is poised to completely change all that, and change it as early as this year. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jekielek. In this episode, we'll sit down with HUD Secretary Ben Carson to discuss how the FYI program was launched in just 4 months after an ambitious group of former foster youth pitched it to the Secretary. We'll also speak to program participant Adaora Onuora, as well as 2 longtime advocates for foster youth who helped make this happen, Ruth Anne White and Jamole Callahan. Secretary Ben Carson, great to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
It's always good to be with you.
So we're going to talk today about a few things, but something caught my eye. It's the FYI program, this new program. It's curiously named, but it's actually the Foster Youth to Independence Initiative.
Correct.
And it's actually quite a remarkable story. What is the outcome now? So the program started running, I guess, sometime in July. Is that right?
Yeah, about then.
And so what has happened since?
Well, there's been a lot of fabulous stories. I think one of the television networks did a profile on one of the young ladies whose life was going absolutely nowhere, and now she's got all kinds of big dreams, and what a difference it made. And another young lady, her parents were from Africa. Her mother died. Father went back to Africa, left her and her siblings. They didn't have any place to go after aging out. And this program saved them, and they're on their way to a much better life now, too.
I ended up in foster care in a rather unusual way. My mother passed when I was 15, and then we ended up going to Nigeria to bury her, where my father decided to tell us that we were not going to be coming back. It was me and my 3 siblings. We ended up reaching out to the American Embassy. They granted us the right to come back. They gave us the passports, and we ended up coming back into foster care because, of course, we didn't have any parents. And then I aged out of the system.
So, you've been in the foster care system. Offline, you told me some really, really positive, you've had some really good experiences in there, not 100%, but overall a good experience. Mm-hmm. Tell me a bit about what it's like getting to that moment when you're, what they call aging out or emancipating.
I would say it's a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? It's an anxious time. It's a time where there's so many things going through your head as far as becoming a teenager and and turning into an adult, and what adulthood looks like for you, being as though you didn't have a foundation, whereas, there's adults around you pretty much shaping your future for you and helping you to learn what it is that you're supposed to do and what you're expected to do as an adult. So like finding your way and, depending on the system it's there, but at the same time, it doesn't teach you how to personally embark on your journey of adulthood. It's there to structurally tell you how you're supposed to be an adult, but personally, it's an anxious time. So you have to think about everything, and you're figuring things out. Resources are here, resources are not there. So it's a lot. It's overwhelming. When you're in the system, housing is not, it's not a thought that you would think that it would just go away at any moment until you're in that last year. And, you know, now the social workers are kind of banging it into your head like, okay, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Where can you go? What resources do you have? What family do you have? What friends do you have? So that, I would say, is number one, is housing, stability, how you're going to fend for yourself, what is in your future for post-education, how are you going to eat, what are you know, where does the money come to support yourself and to do all of these things, you know. So it's pretty much all life skills at that point is where the foster child is pretty much just looking towards and how it's going to happen.
So Jamole, you haven't been in foster care for a while now, but you were very much in the system some years back.
I was. I actually entered foster care in Ohio when I was 13. And it was after years of helping my mother take care of my younger sister. And regardless of the many moves that I had, because there was 9 of them, I feel like it was a benefit. I mean, I owe everything that's happening now in my life to that experience.
Tell me a bit about when you aged out, what happened or what was going through your head? What was the reality?
Well, I was nervous. Now, me being a young man, 6'6", I was scared, but I didn't show it, right? You know, you're not supposed to show that you're intimidated by anything. And as I was transitioning out of care, I was about to turn 18. Graduation was on around the corner. So I actually had my own apartment. So they gave me my own apartment and said, hey, you got 6 months. 6 months and you're done. You know, we'll stop paying the bills, have a nice life. So I was able to do that, and I was working and I was on track for graduation, and I actually had a mentor of mine say, you know what, you should be doing something else. I know you're working, I know you think you've hit your ceiling because you're in your own place, but let's really think about this. After we're done with you, after we're done paying the bills, can you really survive on your own? And I said yes, because I was a silly 18-year-old and thought I could handle it, because before I went into care, I was handling things on my own since 11. So I felt like I had a grasp on it for the most part. But when I really broke it down, like, hey, I don't know if this is going to work. I mean, I'm working at Foot Locker, mainly for the shoes, not for the paycheck. Mm-hmm. But when I added everything up, I could have easily been homeless within 2-3 months after the agency or after the county stopped helping. So, which when you think about how FYI works, it's 36 months. They have 3 years. This is the 3-year time limited voucher. And if they enroll in HUD's Family Self-Sufficiency Program, it buys them 2 more years. So when you think about it, this is a 5-year voucher to make sure that those young people who don't have support, they don't have family, they might have some friendships, but the friends can't pay your bills. They have 5 years to become self-sufficient. And that's something I didn't have.
You know, let's talk about the stats. This is an astounding number to me. It's about 20,000 young people that age out or emancipate. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, over the next 4 years, 5,000 of them will end up homeless at some point. Mm-hmm. That is a big problem, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so how is it that this has only been tackled now?
Well, it's interesting because the phenomenon that you described, that 5,000 young people will age out into homelessness every year, it's been going on for many, many years. And it was actually a Republican congressman named Mike Turner from Ohio, one of the offices we worked very closely on this with, who figured out that this is an entirely predictable problem. So you know where these young people are, you know the date that they're going to emancipate, that is either their 18th or their 21st birthday. Why couldn't we plan around that? So while tragic, it's predictable. So we decided to find a way to capitalize on the predictability. And so your question about why now, why not before, the reality is if you're working on poverty programs or social programs, the best people to come up with the solutions are the people that have benefited from those programs. So we started working with young people who aged out of foster care to get their ideas.
Right.
I really think that the solution took the input and the sophistication that the young people can offer, and it's hard won because they actually went through the system.
Fascinating. First of all, was there no program to help with that originally? Why wouldn't there have been a program?
Well, there's a family unification
Right.
program, but it tends to concentrate on other things. And, the foster youth are just a very minor part of that program. So it wasn't anywhere near sufficient enough to deal with this problem.
What kind of circumstances would allow you to qualify for this?
If you were out there and you find yourself without a place to live. And unfortunately, that happens quite a lot with young people. Sometimes, even if you can find a job, if the job's only paying you $12 an hour, you might have a very difficult time finding someplace that you can afford to live, particularly if you live on one of the coasts.
And out of all the years we've been meeting with HUD, Secretary Carson was the first sitting secretary we physically met with. And maybe everyone else's schedule was just busy. But he was the first one that sat down and had an honest conversation with us. He listened to our proposal and listened tentatively, right? And, to the point where somewhere in the middle of our meeting, he said, you really did your homework. And if any one of you want to come work for HUD, just let me know. And we left that meeting feeling great about it. What we didn't expect was for this initiative within 4 months be enacted. So that day in March that we met with him, he took it to his council. They start working out the logistics on how this could happen. I mean, we gave him a number of what we needed to make the program really thrive. And I get a call about 2 weeks towards the end of the month of July and said, hey, we need you in Milwaukee. We're going to do the rollout. And, Ruthie and I are on the phone and we're like, okay, you want us to do what? We want you to set up a press conference and we're going to roll this out in Milwaukee. So, we call people in Milwaukee, we say, hey, do you have young people that need this voucher that we can get them to the press conference? And within 2 weeks, we're on the plane and we're in Milwaukee with the secretary handing out the first set of FYI vouchers. And to see that happen again in 4 months, and for any political policy person, nothing gets done in 4 months. Nothing at all. So when you think about the magnitude of how many young people we have the possibility of serving, this is something that's transformable. We just got word that from July 26th, when we started the program, to December 31st, we helped 257 youth. And just in the month of January alone, 216 with another 40 requests going through the application process. This is something that has been unheard of. And we are doing exactly what we set out to do, and that's housing young people.
So you work pretty closely with Ruthie, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I call her my powerhouse.
Okay.
Because I've learned a lot from her, and we met on one of our earlier trips to DC, and some of the young people and alumni knew of her from years before I came back to the state and got fully involved. Okay. And the first day I met her, I was like, oh yeah, I need to stick next to you because you're very knowledgeable about, policy. And I've always been intrigued with politics and policy and government. That was like the secret nerd in me. Mm-hmm. So when we got to working together, I said, yeah, let me soak up everything you know. So from having now phone calls to coming to DC every month, and their relationship hit off. And she's probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know about housing. So to be able to work with the National Center on Housing and Child Welfare has been a blessing, because Action Ohio, I mean, we have, again, very limited resources, but also we have the people that are passionate, and we were able just to bridge the gap with the answers.
It's an idea that emerged directly from the young people themselves, who spent about 6 years studying the experience of aging out of foster care and how could they possibly close the gaps when a young person ages out, through which about half of the kids who age out of foster care
And just
end up
tell us,
homeless.
for the benefit of the audience, this aging out, what does that mean exactly? It might not be obvious.
So when the government takes young people into care, they place them in a variety of placements, maybe foster care, maybe a group home. But at some point, they are aged out of the system. So in some states, that is age 18, and in over half the states, that's the age of 21. And at that point, the government sort of ends their responsibility for care and custody of you, and you have to face the world alone.
Wow. And, typically, often people will have some sort of family support, but in these cases, it can be, I guess, very lonely.
It is true. They're facing the intersection of adulthood and childhood alone without the support of a family.
So how does FYI fit in here?
Well, when a young person reaches the age of emancipation, we have found that there's an extraordinary lack of predictability about what the future holds. And so one of the things that young people, as you can imagine, struggle with the most, even if they're working, is covering the cost of housing. So FYI creates a process by which a case manager working with the young person aging out can determine, along with the young person, whether or not they would need a housing subsidy to make ends meet for a little while after they age out. If that is the case, they simply make a referral to their public housing authority, and HUD dispenses the funds on demand, and it completely synchronizes the emancipation from foster care with affordable housing.
And so emancipation, that's the same as aging out? That's it.
Essentially, yeah, aging out and emancipation are the same.
I've been hearing a lot about your organization. Tell me a bit how you got involved in all this.
So Action Ohio, so we're an alumni organization in Ohio where we felt as if we needed to make sure that there was a collective voice of youth who've aged out of care to help change policy. So ACTION actually is an acronym. It stands for Alumni of Care, Improving Outcomes Now, not later, but now. Okay. And for years, we've always been on the front lines, not only in the state, but federally, on how to shift policy, influence policy. Again, it's about improving outcomes of our brothers and sisters in care.
So tell me a little bit about working with Jamole.
Oh, Jamole is probably my closest partner in all of this. His heart is in the work because he lived through the system. He also has siblings that had a very different experience. Jamole struggled when he aged out of foster care, but he was able to find a way to become a very successful professional. But he has siblings who went through the system and that did not work out for them. So he's very passionate about ensuring that every young person gets what they need so that they can become self-sufficient. And for about 6 years, they've been coming to DC to try and learn as much as they can about policy so that they could solve these problems at the time of emancipation. And they reached out to me because I happen to be from Ohio, and I run a very small nonprofit called the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. And we've worked in full partnership for about 6 years to figure out the best way to synchronize housing and child welfare at the time of emancipation.
Was there ever a moment where you didn't know, hey, am I going to be able to have a place to live? When that bell tolls, right, 21?
Yes. I would say the last 3 months of my 20th birthday were the hardest for me. I was utilizing CELA, which is a semi-independent living arrangement through foster care. It's where they give you a stipend and you go and pay your bills on your own and stuff like that. So me and my sister, we did that. And in the last 3 months, I knew that I was aging out, but she was going to be able to stay. And I was a little scared because I didn't know how I was going to do it. And once the stipend was taken away, it was going to be way harder for me. So it was really a trying time at that moment. But just in the nick of time, I think the last 2 weeks of me being in foster care, I was awarded the voucher and I was able to move into my own unit.
So basically with this FYI program, and if I'm reading this correctly, essentially anyone in your position could step into this.
Yes, it would be.
And that just wasn't the case before.
Yep, it would be uniform nationwide. What FYI comes to do is to make it a uniform platform nationwide so that it's on-demand vouchers for youth that are aging out of foster care, and they don't have to be homeless before they're able to get the voucher. You just literally can just transition from foster care to the program, and you're able to stay on track in order to maintain self-sufficiency.
So the first version of the housing policy was a direct mirror of the VASH program, the Veterans Housing Program.
Okay.
And we asked for HUD to run it exactly how they ran the Veterans Program.
Okay.
So our first year coming to DC, we presented it to HUD. They said, oh, this is nice. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. Because it was similar, there was still some things that we didn't understand about policy and how the voucher program would work, and how, we were requesting that, some of our young people, because we knew exactly when they were going to be aging out, go to the top of the list. But we found out quickly that that wouldn't work because of disadvantaging others that are currently on the list. And if you know anything about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the waiting list is long. We're talking 3 to 5 years, sometimes 6, of those people who are just waiting. And you can imagine and only think about, where are they waiting?
6 years from the time that the bell tolls and you age out or emancipate, and then you're waiting.
And you're waiting. And you're waiting. And if you see any study on homelessness, there is a vast majority of our young people who are now adults that are homeless. And we know that that's an issue.
This is what you told me offline, right? That they basically crafted something that could fit into the Housing and Urban Development's existing structures or legal structures and so forth. That's fascinating.
Well, it is fascinating. So the young people did their research and they determined that there is an existing program called the Family Unification Program. So the Family Unification Program provides Section 8 vouchers for youth aging out of foster care. However, they're only available in some parts of the country, and they're even in the parts of the country where they have the Family Unification Program vouchers, they're not available necessarily at the time the young person is aging out of the system. So in studying that program, they ended up working on a piece of legislation called the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act that would perhaps make it easier to access those vouchers. But as we worked on the legislation, we realized much of what they wanted to do with the Family Unification Program was already within the authority of the HUD Secretary. So we researched the regs together with the youth, and we determined he had the authority to do what we were asking in the bill.
So in other words, again, for the benefit of the lay person out there, why is that significant?
Well, it's significant because if you take a state like Ohio, there's 88 counties and almost 88 housing authorities in that state. So if a young person is aging out in, say, Muskingum County, and there aren't vouchers available, they will age out into homelessness. But if they're in, say, Hamilton County, and there are vouchers available, they will actually access the resource and they won't experience homelessness. So what the youth said was, isn't there a way to universalize this program across the country? And so we found that the Secretary did have the authority to provide vouchers anywhere in the country through a very specific fund within HUD. And so we wrote a proposal around that and presented it to the Secretary.
And we loved their ideas. Obviously, some work had to be done to it, but just the fact that they took the initiative to do that and to really make a compelling case, which a lot of people were happy to listen to. On both sides of the aisle, people are happy to listen to something like that. So I encourage people, all people who have a real problem spend a little bit of time trying to figure out what to do, make some suggestions, bring it to people, talk about it. You never know what might happen.
I think a lot of people know that you'd had a challenging childhood, to say the least. And what was going through your mind as these kids came with this entrepreneurial spirit?
Well, I was thinking about what's going to happen to them if we don't do something, and they're very valuable individuals. Obviously, if they have enough initiative to be thinking the way that they are, they can be tremendous contributors to our society, and we need to make sure that we give them a solid foundation from which to launch.
The key player here, the key partner here was Dr. Carson himself. So the idea that you could go to get an audience, first of all, with a cabinet official, a willing audience with a cabinet official who would sit down with current and former foster youth to hear them out, was sort of issue number one. Issue number two is the youth worked so hard with housing experts to create an airtight proposal that by the time they presented it to the secretary, it really was ready to go. But this idea that the Secretary Carson is so pragmatic and can process data so quickly, he heard their proposal and essentially said, this is fundable, it's within my authority, it doesn't require action from Congress, let's move. And so he had his Office of General Counsel review the proposal, and once they realized that it was actionable, he didn't see any reason to wait. So within 4 months of the time that we met with him, the program was offered to public housing authorities, and it went live within 4 months.
It's not the typical story you hear in DC, I guess, right?
It's atypical, but I think it's because you have this extraordinary partnership from the young people themselves. One of the young people that came out to visit with the secretary directly was Roman from Ohio, who's was an 18-year-old ward of the state, and the secretary treated him like the expert that he was. So I think it's a unique story, but the fact that you have current and former foster youth meeting directly with the secretary, who the secretary himself experienced poverty as a child. He had a very chaotic childhood, so I think he had a very open mind and no preconceived notions, and that, to me, I think that just explains the speed with which they took it.
How did this program in particular, what did it bring that wasn't there before to you?
Stability.
Okay.
Concrete foundation, predictability, certainty, an ease of mind, and it just allowed me to not have to look over my shoulder for where I was going to stay, and just kind of focus on being a 23-year-old college student that's trying to become a self-sufficient adult.
Yeah, in some ways, we hear all these stories about young people, staying at home longer these days. But if you're in foster care,
that's not an option.
It's never going to happen, right?
It's not an option.
So, and how difficult is it? I mean, it sounds like you're very self-motivated from the beginning. But for the typical person, some of the other folks that have been in the system, it's not as easy. I'm just trying to get a sense here.
I wouldn't say that it's not as easy. I would just say that it really depends on the person as far as from an internal aspect as well as an external aspect. Regarding the internal aspect, it's pretty much the not having pity for yourself, because there's a tale as old as time where, foster youth, they pretty much kind of bash the system because of, the things that they've went through that are negative, but they allow the negative to overrule the positive, so they kind of just become set in the negative, and they don't want to propel themselves to be able to utilize other opportunities. And as far as the external aspect, I would say it's through communication, just miscommunication, and not really informing the youth as much as they could be informed as far as the workers are concerned. But to their defense, I would say that all of everything that they're not informing youth about, some of it they're not certain about themselves. It all goes off of how the government runs and whether those types of dollars are available for the certain programs or opportunities or, vouchers or, grants or anything like that that are usually available to youth. So it's kind of a double-sided thing, if you may.
Ruth, you've been in this field for 20 years now. And when we were speaking offline, you mentioned that this program is somehow different from anything you've worked on before.
I would say that in my 20 years of working in DC on affordable housing policy, this is unique to American social policy. You have two federal departments that have found a way to synchronize their programs on the ground to eliminate the gaps through which youth fall into homelessness. And it's so often the case that people talk about silos and they lament the fact that different services systems don't talk to each other. This has eliminated that entirely and forced the systems to work together to create a platform for self-sufficiency, and I'm honored to be a part of that.
And can you just give me a thumbnail of how these agencies are working together, which two, and how they're working together? Yeah.
It's very interesting. So when a young person is referred to the program and a housing authority is ready to request money from HUD, they cannot request that money unless the two organizations have a signed memorandum of understanding that they will support this young person once they get the voucher. Now, of course, you want a very low level of social services because it's about self-sufficiency, but that young person will always have a connection to someone that cares about them throughout the life of the voucher.
So do you feel there's any potential for abuse in the program?
Well, it's very interesting. So these are young people that we've removed. A government entity has determined that their parents are not a safe place for them to live. So we, as a government, have decided that these children need to live in foster care. So when they reach the age of 18 or 20, we would want them to go to school, get a job, just like our own children. And so I have 3 children. I have a 19-year-old who's in college, and we're subsidizing his housing. But the expectation that we have is that he will get great job skills and be prepared to go off and support himself. So this program is a time-limited program, but it's really in a similar way that we would treat our own children. So it's a 3-year voucher, and the expectation throughout is that they will use it as a platform for self-sufficiency. They'll work, they'll go to school, improve their skills, and at the end of that 3 years, they really are going to have to be self-sufficient. When this program was originally designed, so this has been a 6-year process, the young people who designed it included a work requirement or school, so work or school. And over the years, poverty advocates have pushed back on that. I mean, there's been an intense blowback about that.
We wanted a work and school requirement, and the work and school requirement was there because we felt as basically wards of the state that we didn't want to hand out. We wanted to hand up. So we wanted to work, and we wrote that in, work requirement, school requirement. So if you're doing one of the two, you could benefit from the voucher. And what we received was, that's not going to work because either political side might view it differently. So we had to go back to the drawing board on that.
But the way that we've put in protections, absent a work requirement, is it is a time-limited resource. So you must use it as a platform for self-sufficiency, because at the end of the 36 months, you're going to be on your own. So you really have to build up a savings account. You have to build a resume. There shouldn't be any gaps on your resume. Finish your college degree if that's what you want to do. So I think the time limit helps, but it's also the case that the social services that are built in are designed to help you access employment, access whatever you need to be self-sufficient. So I think the time limit is also very different in American social policy. Other Section 8 vouchers are not time limited. This is the only voucher that's time limited in HUD's entire portfolio, and the youth fully support that.
The way that it's set up, it is geared to compel youth to do what they're supposed to do, to be an adult, and the workers that you have to see on a regular basis, you have to keep up with things like your credit, savings accounts, jobs, schooling. You have to be doing something. You can't just be, abusing the system, as you'd say. So it's literally like a stepping stone. It's not an enabler.
So it seems right now, let's see if I have this right, that it's about $750,000 that have been committed to this program. Where do you expect things to go now?
Well, I don't expect the program to exceed $20 million because of the number of youth that are, there is some forecasting that we can do. Well, over time, we think less young people will be aging out of foster care alone. They'll be better. We're working hard on permanency. We're also working to keep families together. So we would want to overall reduce the number of children that are orphans of the state who are aging out on their own, building stronger families. So we don't expect it to exceed $20 million, and over time we expect it to even be further reduced, and eventually we would like to use $0 on this.
But I understand there's also an opportunity for this 2-year extension. How does that work?
Well, it is the case that the Foster Youth to Independence program emerged from a piece of legislation that we've been developing over 6 years. That legislation is called the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act. And the way that legislation is designed is that a young person would get a Section 8 voucher for 3 years. And if they choose, they can enroll in something called the Self-Sufficiency Program. And in doing that, they can extend the voucher for an additional 2 years. But throughout that time, they must be working. But the increase in their income is deposited into a savings account for them. So they are rewarded for improving their income, they're rewarded for their industriousness, and the end of that 5 years, they are handed that savings account free and clear. But they're also no longer using the voucher. So that legislation is a brilliant package, but Congress has to do its work to move that. It's actually in the Senate. We do have high hopes that it will pass. But FYI, is the portion of that bill that was within Secretary Carson's regulatory authority. And so he took us up on the plan almost immediately upon hearing about it. So the 2-year extension, when a young person is actively involved in a self-sufficiency plan, would come into place when the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act passes, and we actually hope that it will become law by May, which is actually foster care month. So we hope that there'll be a bill signing in May and we can all celebrate it.
So you were able to go into this legislation that you've been trying to develop for years and pull out a piece of that and just make it happen, basically, right?
Right. So it was a magical moment when we had this revelation that what we were trying to accomplish through the bill was a sizable portion of that was already an eligible activity that was within the authority of the Secretary of HUD. So in taking that to the Secretary, he agreed, and within 4 months he actually implemented. I've never seen anything move at that speed, absent something like a natural disaster or something of that nature.
I really just want to thank all of the officials that have been behind this initiative, because they've pushed it out so fast, like really faster than a lot of like any initiative I've ever seen in my lifetime. So I just want to thank them. There's a long list, so I won't name all of them, but just to thank them, and also, you know, just to keep pushing, because we're almost at the finish line, and this is like literally a turning point of something where we can just change all of, you know, all of the youth that will be emancipating from next year on. We can change their lives, and to have that certainty is it's really needed. It really is, because the way life is set up, it's scary out there, and to come from a system that nurtured you until you were 21 and just kind of be thrown to the wolves, it's even scarier. So yes, I would just like to thank everyone who's, you know, played a part in pushing this initiative, and who's been in other people's ears to push the initiative, and, you know, just for them to understand that it's not going unnoticed. And our team is eternally grateful.
So you're going to be graduating soon. What's next?
I have a few job offers after college, but my calling is law. I want to be a politician, and I want to make changes for my community. So that's my goal.
Such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, likewise.